The Russian ruble has depreciated over 90% in the last 10 years. Just this year alone, I think high to low is like 65%. The Turkish lira did the same. Bitcoin is a lifeline to people in countries with really poor stewardship of their economy. And we should be thrilled that Russians can get some of their money in Bitcoin so they're not completely broke holding worthless rubles.
Mike Novogratz is the CEO and founder of Galaxy Digital and was formerly a partner and president of Fortress Investment Group. His firm provides investors, institutional and retail, with a full suite of financial solutions spanning the digital assets ecosystem. In our recent interview, Novogratz discusses his outlook for Bitcoin in 2022 and beyond while weighing in on the role of digital assets in the geopolitical tension in Ukraine and how 8 hikes will affect the market. According to Novogratz, Bitcoin's surge in 2021 was because of the pandemic-related liquidity the Fed provided. He adds that things are not going as well for the asset because of the geopolitical tension and the impending rate hikes. On Wednesday, the Fed raised interest rates by 25 basis points or 0.25%, with about 6 more hikes expected in 2022. With all these uncertainties surrounding the market, Novogratz explains that investors are cautious. Bitcoin is a narrative story. It is bringing people into the community, but it is hard to bring in new people when their house is on fire. Novogratz explains in his interview. The American businessman and investor also talks about the possibility of Russia using cryptocurrencies to evade sanctions. He states that there is zero chance of that happening as major exchanges follow due process to verify users. Please listen to Novogratz's thoughts on cryptocurrencies and sanctions, central bank digital currencies, and how Bitcoin is a better store of value than fiat currencies.
Well, I think, let's say the dollar might never be the same, right? I mean, I think the biggest thing that's happened in the last 10 years in lots of ways, maybe longer, is when Europe, the US said, hey, Russia, those reserves that you thought were yours, they're not really your reserves. So what does that mean? It means the dollar or treasuries as a risk-free asset isn't so risk-free. It's not risk-free if you're Russian, and maybe if you're Chinese, you're like, it might not be risk-free either. And so I think we're entering in a world that's unknown, where people are going to struggle to figure out what is the reserve currency. The U.S. isn't going away, right? The dollar's not going away, but it's not going to be the sole place. And so I think you're going to see this hodgepodge of assets. Gold, certainly digital assets are going to be part of that bucket. The whole world's not going to flip to Bitcoin overnight. But you're going to see more and more people say, I want to have some of my money outside of the sovereign.
How do you deal with that debate, though? Because a lot of people are talking about the problem with cryptocurrency is that you can use it to circumvent these sanctions. On the other hand, people in the community are saying, that's the point, right? We don't want government censorship to be able to take away our property.
So let's talk big and small. There is zero chance the Russian government can use cryptocurrencies to circumvent. Right? We're regulated by 25 different agencies, Galaxy, and I'm sure FTX and Binance and the others have just as many. And so almost all crypto moves through exchanges. Those exchanges have KYC AML processes, just like TradeFi exchanges. And so, plus Bitcoin is a public blockchain. Way back we hired Mike Morell, who had run the CIA, Galaxy, and a few other companies, to do a study on Bitcoin. And he did like a 10 weeks exhaustive study with the security agencies, with the 3-letter agencies, with crypto companies. And he came up with a thesis that if you were going to design a trap to catch criminals, it would look a lot like the Bitcoin blockchain. And so it's just, Elizabeth Warren is just wrong when she thinks you can use Bitcoin for Russia to evade sanctions. And we're looking at it the wrong way. The Russian ruble has depreciated over 90% in the last 10 years. Just this year alone, I think high to low is like 65%. The Turkish lira did the same. Bitcoin is a lifeline to people in countries with really poor stewardship of their economy. And we should be thrilled that Russians can get some of their money in Bitcoin so they're not completely broke holding worthless rubles.
Well, that brings me to the question of what the use case is, because in the context we're talking about it, it's essentially as a replacement for fiat currencies. Is that how you view what the future of digital assets is?
Listen,
is it a store of value?
So digital assets is a big word, right? I think Bitcoin has this really beautiful lane of being digital gold or a store of value. Everyone has a human right to have the fruits of their labor stored somewhere. And if you don't trust your government's currency, traditionally we put it in diamonds or gold. This is the first really digital version of that. And so I think that's Bitcoin's use case. Now listen, there's also a lot of other digital assets. There's digital stable coins or digital dollars or euros. There's things, Ethereum, digital networks, NFTs, right? And so the revolution that's happening isn't just in one lane. But I think for Bitcoin, it really is a place you store value.
How important are the CBDCs, right? Because today when I saw the headline that the Saudis might start selling the Chinese oil in yuan, the first thing I thought about was, oh, they're so far ahead of us with the digital yuan.
Yeah, so I think this is the biggest national security concern that every country should have. And as every citizen, you've got to understand that one CBDC and a stablecoin ain't the same thing, right? It all comes down to who controls them. And so if you look at the Chinese version, where it's a blockchain of one, right? It's complete, total transparency into every transaction you do. So you're giving up complete privacy, right? The version that we're pushing for, the blockchain community here in the US, what Brian Brooks pushed when he was the head of the OCC, was private companies running on a public blockchain, but those assets backed by assets held at Fed banks. Right? So it's where your privacy goes. I was on a call literally with the central bank governor of Brazil at one point, and I was pointing out that their president didn't really like gay people. I just Googled Bolsonaro gay, and there's about 18 pages of pretty uncomfortable stuff. And so if you're gay in Brazil, you don't want your country knowing every last purchase you made. So where do we care about privacy? And this sounds nuanced, but it is the single most important part of understanding how important this fight of CBDCs is.
One of the common issues that naysayers have raised within the past month is the fact that Bitcoin is not a hedge against inflation or a haven. People have also talked about how Bitcoin seems to be correlated with the stock market. In fact, many people, including certain professionals in the field, have compared Bitcoin to an ordinary tech stock. Novogratz explains that these are mere conjectures and that the problem that the asset is currently facing applies to all other major assets too. The CEO also makes a $500,000 prediction for Bitcoin based on how fast its adoption has been.
Bitcoin went up a lot last year on this story of the Fed printing money forever. That's what pushed all risk assets up, right? We had this unbelievable amount of liquidity. And it came off because the Fed, Chairman Powell finally said, hey, I got to take this more seriously than I've been taking it, and I'm going to get hawkish. We're starting to see a little bit of a breakdown. I don't think Bitcoin can rally aggressively until we get a pause. And I would tell you that because Bitcoin's a narrative story. It's bringing people into a community. Yeah. There are 150 million people into that community. Most are staying in it. Right? That's the 8th biggest country in the world. It's bigger than Russia. So Bitcoin holders are a bigger country if you think it's sovereignty than Russia. But to bring new people in, it's hard when their house is on fire. And right now, if you talk to any investor, Chinese stocks are cratering, tech stocks are cratering. Their mindset isn't like, let me see where I can find more risk. And so, we're going to hit a pause. The war will end. Let's, pray to God. The Fed will go and we'll start saying, hey, we've priced in the Fed. And once markets hit some equilibrium, I think you're going to see the narrative really take off.
So where would you set a target for year end this year and 5 years out?
Great question. Listen, I think, like the other bald Mike, the NASDAQ has further to go to the downside this year. I think literally the Fed hasn't even started hiking rates. They haven't started pulling liquidity from the system. And so the whole year thought we'd be a 30,000, 50,000 range in Bitcoin. Risk to the upside, not the downside. But I think, 5 years out, if Bitcoin's not at 500,000, I'm wrong on the adoption cycle, right? We see an adoption cycle that accelerates. Bitcoin grew so much faster last year, crypto grew, than the internet did its best years in the 90s. And so I see this going viral everywhere. If it's in the Mideast or in pension funds in the United States, all getting ready to participate.
Novogratz also talks about the demographics of investors in the digital asset space and how the space gives equal opportunities to people from all walks of life.
We have heard a number of mayors push for this, and really since the beginning, there's been this kind of egalitarian, obviously libertarian feeling in the Bitcoin community. You mentioned 150 million people have now adopted it, but I never expected there to be so many, predominantly white male whales. And we really have seen that. Is that a problem?
Well, listen, I mean, white males own most of the money in the world. And so I would tell you that you would expect any new technology to have a lot of them in it. What's more promising is if you look at people of color as a percentage of people who participate, it's higher in blacks, it's higher in Hispanics. When I look at young versus old, right, this is a generational move. I cheekily say I identify as Gen Z. It's because it's a revolution of young people who looked up and said, I don't like the way the world's looking. Right? I'm losing faith, I'm losing trust. And we see trust breaking down everywhere. And so I think if you looked at young versus old, there's a much bigger representation in young. Certainly there are more white whales than people of color whales because they started out with so much more, right? I mean, blacks are 13% of the population, they own 1.5% of the wealth. And so it would have been shocking if that was the difference.
Mike, what about the idea that Bitcoin can be the great equalizer? If there's going to be a parallel financial system being created via new technology, do you have any evidence that it could be a more equal system?
Well, crypto gives everybody equal access, right? Anybody can participate in the Bitcoin network. I don't need to have a certain level of wealth. I don't need to be in a private equity or a venture fund. I can go on and I can participate. I can build on it. I can invest in it.
And DeFi is part of the big promise as well, right?
Same thing with DeFi, and quite frankly, same thing with NFT communities, right? What is the surprise to me this year is that NFTs have become the killer app of the blockchain. It's the first place we said, hey, we're using this outside of an experiment, outside of a sandbox. We're using it in real life. Artists are making money, musicians are making money, big brands are making money. And so I actually think it's the most exciting thing that's going on.
Novogratz predicts that Bitcoin will hit $500,000 in the next 5 years, but he is not very bullish for 2022. For this year, the businessman and investor expects the asset to maintain our range between $30,000 and $50,000. Do you agree with him? Please share your thoughts and observations in the comments section below. Also, remember to hit the like button and check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. Thanks for watching.